Hello everyone, my name is Roya and I am telling you guys about the 4 books that I read in the month of May. I know 4 books is not that much and a couple of them, they were all like mostly pretty short, but a couple of them were really short. So I feel like my reading progress in May was horrible because I'm used to reading like 10 books a month and the past couple of months have been like absolutely dismal in terms of quantity. But in terms of quality, it was still really good. The books that I read were all good books. None of them were like my favorite, most excellent, but they were all really good. So these are not in any particular order because I was reading them all kind of at the same time. So I'm just gonna get the ebooks out of the way first. So the first book I'm going to talk to you guys about is an e-arc that I was sent from Penguin Teen. It was A Devil in the Device by Laura Beth Johnson. This is the sequel to Goddess in the Machine. This series, or this duology, since it is just the 2 books and this was the second and final installment, the series follows a girl who about 100 years into the future, gets cryogenically frozen to make the trip to a new planet. She's supposed to be frozen for only 100 years, but somehow she actually ends up waking up 1,000 years later, so the whole world is completely different, and no one she knew it before is there or anything, and it's this whole crazy thing. So I felt like the first book blew me away. I don't know if you guys remember me reviewing it about this time last year. I really, really loved the first book. So I felt like the second one was very meh compared to the first one. And actually what's funny is that the first 3/4 of this book were mostly filler and I was kind of getting bored, and at one point I was kind of switching between reading it on my e-reader and reading it on my phone because I went somewhere and only took my phone, so I like read part of it on my phone, and I actually ended up skipping a little bit of it and barely even noticed because the whole first like 3/4 of the book were so like the same, and I found myself really not caring as much and I was getting really bored. But then suddenly, at exactly the 75% point of the book, I seriously suddenly, like, things just suddenly happened. And I was like, holy crap. And it became really, really good from that point on. So it was kind of weird. So I thought the pacing in that way was just really odd and didn't really do it for me compared to the first book. The first book was so good the whole way through. I could barely put it down. And it was just so weird, but the second one was not as good. I really didn't feel like there was that much of a point in having this second book because a lot of it could have been skipped over and the rest of it could have just been added on to the first book because it wasn't even that long and it almost could have been combined and been a standalone, but like whatever, basically. There was definitely enough there in the last fourth of the book to make it really good and really enjoyable and totally worth reading, but I don't know. I just felt like the first one was so good and that was almost all I needed. I almost didn't, after reading the second book, I almost feel like it wouldn't have mattered if I had read it or not. I don't know. It's weird. I really preferred the first book. So even if you just read the first book, it's totally worth it. You should check it out. So then also the other ebook I read this month was also an e-arc, but it was sent to me by the author. So this was Crowning Courtship by J.C. Jarvis. This is the 4th and final book in her Hands of Destin series. This is a series of fantasy romance books that basically follows, they each follow different main characters, but the main characters of all of them are all friends. So yeah, they're all friends. They mostly even like live together in one big house and all that stuff, but each of them kind of follows a different romance story of one of them as the main, one or two of them as the main characters. So this one, I really loved this whole series. I gave the first 3 books 5 stars. I thought they were absolutely amazing. But this one I only gave 4 stars only because I felt like there were a couple of things in there that weakened the plot a little bit. I felt like there was, this romance in this book follows a girl who doesn't think she's that pretty. She's kind of plain looking, and a dude who's like a total womanizer and a swoon-worthy gentleman and all that stuff. And I love that type of thing. I love it when, one character thinks that they're super plain and not desirable, but they actually are, and stuff like that. Just because they're not conventionally pretty doesn't mean shit. Like, I love that trope so much. So I think that went really well in this book, but there was also some stuff about the two main characters of this one having like kind of known each other as children very briefly in a way that they like barely remembered it. And while that is a trope that arises in romance quite a bit, and it's not that weird to have that in there, I felt like it was such a small part of the story and didn't do anything to change it at all. It didn't add anything to the story, so I felt like it could have been left out, and all it really did was kind of weaken the plot a little bit, in that it was like an attempt to have something else there that wasn't really, built upon in any way. It was just really odd. I don't know. But also this book did do a lot to kind of tie up the loose ends and all that other stuff that the previous three books kind of left us with. So any of the other main characters of the previous three books kind of got a little bit more to their story as well. But it also kind of gave us this like last chapter that didn't really have a whole lot to do with the two main characters of this book, but they were still the point of view characters of it. And that almost could have just been left out. Like, I felt like all that did was really kind of weaken the plot and give us like it was kind of there to give us one more glimpse of the whole gang together. But I feel like we already got that with the final showdown with the villain, kind of. So there wasn't really a point to having that scene, especially since it happened 2 years later. It's like suddenly the epilogue is 2 years later, and they're just kind of helping somebody else, basically. Like, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with them. So it was kind of odd. I don't know. So I gave this book 4 stars instead of the 5 that the other 3 books got. I think it was my least favorite of the series, but I still really loved it. And I think the whole series is really, really worth reading. Next, I'm going to talk about A Treason of Thorns by Laura E. Weymouth. This is a weird book where basically it's an alternate version of England, or olden day-ish England. I'm not entirely sure of the time period of this, but basically the nobility kind of England each lives in these magical houses that kind of how the house is doing affects how the countryside and the harvest and general well-being of the area does. And if you betray the king, you get put under house arrest, where your house kills you. Essentially, your ability to like use the house's magic safely gets taken away. So you basically get trapped in your house, and the house just slowly kills you by using magic through you and all of that other stuff. So the main character of this book is a girl who 7 years ago, her father did betray the king by trying to free her family's house that they were living in that's magical, and he got placed under house arrest for 7 years, and then finally at the beginning of the story he has finally died from being under house arrest. So the main character, the girl, basically has to try to convince the king, who's a douchebag, that she should be the next caretaker of this house because she's the one who really cares and really knows what to do, and the house really wants her, and not some douchebag noble guy or whatever. So pretty much the whole premise of the book is her trying to fix everything that's going wrong with her house, because of course it's all decrepit and falling apart because her dad was placed under house arrest there. And the house just did like all this awful stuff, and so it's all like falling apart. But the king won't give her the key to the house, so she can't actually use the house's magic or anything like that. So it's a super weird book. It makes no sense in this great way. I don't even know how you come up with the unique ideas that are in this. It's like, what the fuck? And it's great. But The only thing that I wasn't so sure about was that, I mean, there's a romance subplot in this that seems super underdeveloped, but honestly, I don't really dock it points for that because it's YA, and oftentimes in a YA book, a romance is kind of just thrown in there. And sometimes it's really underdeveloped and not a huge part of the story, but it's like in there because it's aimed at teenagers and they just, some people just want to see that in there. So I don't really dock it points for having like a super underdeveloped romance or anything like that, but I felt like that could have been done a lot better. But for the most part, like the whole idea of everything in this book was really good, and I really liked reading it. And finally, I read Thomas the Rhymer by Ellen Kushner. This follows Thomas the Rhymer, obviously, who is a bard of sorts, who basically gets kidnapped by the fairy queen, essentially, to go to the land of the Fae, where he has to live there for 7 years and basically play music for her court. And he can't talk to anyone except her unless he's performing, like, and singing. Like, he can sing and stuff, but like for just talking, he can only speak to her, and it's like super weird. And he starts off being like, oh well, okay, like I've always wanted to go to the land of the Fae, so whatever. But obviously, we all know that fairy people really like to fuck with people, and they just like, yeah, it's super weird that, and he hates, by the end of it, he's like, why the fuck am I here, basically. So then he has to go back to the human world, and he can't lie anymore. Basically, the fairy queen makes him unable to lie, so anytime he talks, he can only speak the truth. So he has a really hard time avoiding telling people that he went to the land of the Fae. So anyway, this was a really interesting premise. It's a much older book, and there were parts of it, like especially at the beginning, where I was kind of like, what is going on here? Like, but and the point of view changes were kind of weird because each section of the book is a different person's point of view, which is really random. So some of these people, you're not even really sure who they are because they've barely shown up and stuff like that. But overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely highly recommend it. So anyway, those are the books that I read in the month of May. I almost said the first half of May, but nope, there weren't halves this month. That's all I read in May. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these and have any thoughts on them and what you read in May, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!